Russia had been in a state of social unrest for most of the 19th century under the rule of the Tsar, which finally boiled over in 1917, leading to the First Russian Revolution, the overthrow of the autocracy, and the creation of a communist government. The revolution also influenced the outcome and the eventual victory of the Allies in World War I. The Tsar, the political leader of Russia, always maintained the belief of having complete power over the government and oppressing any reform. A strict order was always in place. Everyone had to worship the Russian Orthodox Church, speak Russian, and not question the authority of the Tsar in order to not be considered a threat to the nation. Alexander III became the Tsar in 1881 and planned to destroy any revolutionary groups by placing a harsh control over written, private, and public documents. He also made Russian the official language and persecuted any other national groups within Russia, especially Jews. While oppression was already taking place to most of the Russian citizens, another revolutionary movement began growing which stemmed from the sudden industrialization of Russia. In terms of industrialization, Russia was behind and began making changes for it in 1863. Taxes were raised to account for the growing number of factories. Steel became a major industry by the 1900s. The lives of workers were affected by many problems such as terrible working conditions, child labor, and low wages. So many workers banded together to fight for the better working rights. Many of the revolutionaries followed Marxist views. Karl Marx, the founder of Marxism, had stated that the proletariat, or working class, should rule the country. And in accordance to his views, the workers' protest began to turn into an overthrow of the Tsar. The main radical group in the revolution were the Bolsheviks, who were completely committed to sacrificing everything for the good of the revolution. Their leader was Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, who later became known as Lenin. He was ruthless, organized, and passionate about the revolution. Between 1904 and 1917, a series of events ultimately made way for the revolution. In 1904, during the Russo-Japanese War, the Japanese attacked Russia at Port Arthur, Manchuria, for breaking a territory agreement that was made, resulting in turmoil and revolt among the people. In 1905, also known as Bloody Sunday, workers and families petitioned for better working conditions at a national legislature and brought it to the Tsar in St. Petersburg. However, it quickly turned into a bloody massacre when the Tsar, Nicholas II, ordered soldiers to attack. Many other strikes and attacks followed after, until Nicholas II agreed to create the first Russian parliament, the Duma. However, hesitant to share his power, it dissolved 10 weeks later. In 1914, Nicholas II made the decision to bring Russia into World War I. However, Russia's military and economic standing was not stable enough to prepare for war. The army, while big in numbers, was poorly equipped and weak. Nicholas moved to the war front in 1915, leaving his wife in charge of government matters. She later gave the governing power to a man named Rasputin in exchange for healing her son. He was assassinated by a group of revolutionaries in fear of his increasing role in the government. On the war front, the Russian army was losing supplies and dwindling in numbers. The Russian Revolution began with the Februari Revolution, when demonstrators demanding bread took to the streets in the Russian capital of Petrograd, now called St. Petersburg. The protesters, supported by huge crowds of striking industrial workers, clashed with police but refused to leave the streets. On March 10th, the strike spread among all of the Petrograd's workers, and police stations were destroyed by angry mobs of protesters. On March 11th, the troops of the Petrograd army garrison were tasked with ending the uprising. The regiments opened fire and killed demonstrators in some encounters, but the protesters kept to the streets and the troops began to waver. On March 12th, the revolution triumphed when the regiment after regiment of the Petrograd garrison defected to the cause of demonstrators. The imperial government was forced to resign, and the Duma, the Russian parliament, formed a provisional government that peacefully vied with the Petrograd Soviet for control of the revolution. On March 14th, the Petrograd Soviet issued Order No. 1, which instructed Russian soldiers and sailors to obey only those orders that did not conflict with the directives of the Soviet. The next day, March 15, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne in favor of his brother Michael, whose refusal of the crown brought an end to the Tsarist autocracy. Near the end of the war in 1917, the domestic economy of Russia had pretty much collapsed. Food and fuel ran scarce in Russian cities, thus triggering the Februari Revolution. The February Revolution was an uprising that ended with the abdication of the Tsar and the ultimate rise of the Petrograd Soviet in Russia. After the violent clashes in the February Revolution, the government was forced to share power with the Petrograd Soviet. Then on November 6th and 7th in 1917, leftist revolutionaries led by Bolshevik party leader Vladimir Lenin launched a nearly bloodless coup d'etat against the government. The Bolsheviks formed a new Marxist state with Lenin as the head and made peace with Germany, ending Russia's involvement in the war. After fighting a civil war against anti-Bolshevik army forces, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was born in 1922.